Hi there, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to discuss with you today about energy medicine, among a bunch of other things. So, if you could first tell us about yourself and how you got into doing what you're doing, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was really excited to chat with you, and I loved even the title of the podcast, The Rock Bottom, because I think that's something that so many of us who have gone on this healing journey, we know that phase, we know that
Yes, we
period
get
in
what that
which
means when we're not feeling well.
exactly. So my name is Dr. Natasha Fallahi. I specialize in mind-body medicine, and I do functional medicine as well as kind of creative mind-body techniques to help people with chronic illness, autoimmunity, depression, anxiety, feel at home in this world and in their body. So I really got to this place because I went through a massive healing journey myself over a decade ago. I was, growing up kind of one of those people that just considered myself a little bit weak or really sensitive, and I would always get sick. I would get colds all the time. I just constantly had runny noses, sore throats. And if I got sick and my sister got sick or my friends, I would have it twice as long, twice as severe. And so I kind of just grew up thinking that I was just, a sick person or a
hmm
sensitive person. And it was, maybe my late teens, early 20s that I really started thinking this can't be the way that I'm living my life. Things just kept getting worse. And that's when I started asking a lot of questions, wondering why, and going to every doctor and every specialist I could find,
hmm
only to be told that I was crazy, I was making it up, it was in my head, I should take some antidepressants or some birth control for no reason. Just those were the options that were offered to me, and I just couldn't accept that. So I kept asking why, and that's when I came across holistic medicine or even anything in kind of the alternative healing fields. And my saving grace really came through an amazing holistic chiropractor. And she sat me down and listened to my whole story, my whole history, and started putting the pieces together for me. Started explaining to me how we have a physical body, a chemical body, a mental, emotional body, and even our energetic bodies. So I really started to understand how there was disconnect and dysfunction. And when I started getting treatments that addressed all of those aspects of my being, my whole life turned around, my whole health turned around. And that was my healing journey. And then I was in the arts. I was an artist. I was studying graphic design, multimedia in undergrad at the time. And so this healing journey was just a very personal thing for me.
hmm
And as the years went on and I just kept getting healthier and feeling so much better and just, not feeling like that chronically ill person who had no energy, who had to nap all day, I thought, this stuff that I've come across, these like therapists that I'm working with and these doctors who are looking at things holistically, they've changed my life. And that's when I decided I wanted to go back to school after doing the arts and study the
hmm
science and bring together that world. And that's when I went and got my doctorate. And yeah, after that, I kind of just fell into the whole world of healing chronic illnesses and autoimmunity with mind-body medicine and using that holistic approach that I experienced that turned my whole life around. So over a decade later, I don't feel like that sick person anymore. I
Yeah.
actually have more energy than most people I know. I rarely get colds or don't have allergies anymore. It's just, it's really changed my life. So that's how, I came to do what I'm doing now. And,
hmm
I go by the name, the sensitive doctor, because I just really feel like that's the experience that I have, and the people that I love to help are the ones who really have this experience of being too sensitive their whole life.
hmm
And so that was my journey. And I love helping people find that new vitality in their own experience.
It's funny that we connected like this because your story sounds very, very similar to mine. And we have, different conditions, it sounds like, how we actually were diagnosed, but it
Yeah,
took that one person that but we had to find it, we had to
right,
seek it out, and that one person to sort of get it and to
right.
be able to say, I remember the first time I talked to someone and I told them all my things after years and years and years, and they said, well, of course you feel like that because of, A, B, and C. And I cried because I was like, finally, someone who gets it, and they're not saying, here's another pill, here's here's an antidepressant, here's this and that, like
Totally.
there's no reason to feel the way I was feeling other than I'm just too stressed, or that, guess what, I'm too sensitive. Heard that my whole life.
Yeah,
You're too
exactly.
sensitive. You're just too
Exactly.
sensitive. You just worry too much, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, totally. And I think that that was exactly that feeling that I had too, because it was like I kept going to all these doctors hoping to get an answer or a diagnosis, even though it's not like we want to be diagnosed with something. I just wanted an explanation.
mhm,
And the doctor who finally kind of gave me the bigger picture of mind body medicine, she did all these exams. I mean, I think my history with her, when she sat down and asked me all these questions and really listened to me, I think that was about 2 hours or 2.5 hours where I just
yes.
everything, like, my menstrual symptoms, my sleep symptoms, my emotional stuff, my body aches, food things, infections, all of that. She listened to all of it. And that was such a gift for me to have
Mhm.
somebody really listen. And so that's something that I've never skimped on in when I work with people and with clients, because I think so much of that is where we can find the answers to our healing. If somebody who has been through the journey or who knows more of the tools, if they really listen, they can hear the answers in your own
Yes.
story. And so that's why I love using storytelling and narrative medicine with people, where we really dive into doing a look at their history, or kind of them even describing their experience in different things, even using assessments like different personality type
Mhm.
assessments. Things like that give me, as the doctor, so much information with what's going on with that person, and also the path to the healing and the solutions, because something that would work for one person is not going to work for somebody else. And if we understand that bioindividuality, not just in our biochemistry
Mhm.
or our bodies, but also in our emotional experiences, then we can match the treatments and the therapies that are actually sustainable and help us grow in a way and thrive in a way that doesn't feel like a resistant like treatment option or a
Right.
protocol we have to go through. It comes to unwinding those things that our body's already asking for.
Yeah, and for the listeners, she just encapsulated the difference between functional medicine and conventional medicine. So, what conventional medicine appointment, the first time you go in to see a doctor, do people have a 2.5 hour appointment with them to get all the information to
Right.
help their treatment plan, protocols, whatever it might be. And so it's not just looking at the black and white information that comes through from testing and whatnot, which is good information to have, but
Mhm.
there's so many more things, and that might be actually bigger to helping people get over that hump of really truly healing. And
Right.
that's the stuff I think a lot of times we disregard or we put on the back burner because we're
Right.
so driven by looking at data, which I
Yeah.
love. It's important. It's good
Totally.
stuff to it's good to know.
Yeah.
But there's such a bigger piece that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And, conventional medicine is amazing
Hmm.
at a small group of things that are really important for life saving or, life threatening situations. So
Hmm.
like trauma care. And when we talk about like car accidents or emergency medicine,
Hmm.
conventional medicine is amazing at that. Like the fact that they can do blood transfusions or like stitch people up or help, in these emergency situations is one of the wonderful advances of conventional and Western medicine.
Yes.
Um, but when it comes to lifestyle and the things that we're experiencing every day, and when we have things that are slightly imbalanced that aren't going to immediately be life-threatening, that's really where conventional medicine wasn't built for. It's not, the philosophy underneath that is not designed to look at the
Hmm.
subtleties of our health and our human experience. And so I think that there's always a time and place for that kind of necessity of working with, if you need drugs or surgery or things like that. But to have that be the first line of therapy when we're feeling off, or when
Right.
something's, like functioning optimally, or we just don't feel our best selves, is really not the ideal approach. It's like, if you're feeling like some imbalances in our system, we don't want to go and have a surgery, right? Or we don't
Hmm.
want to go just like take some like prescriptions that are going to really shift our biochemistry when it's life threatening. We need that. But if we're on this journey and we're dealing with chronic illness issues, we want to dig into the root cause of why. And that's, like you were saying, where functional medicine and holistic practices look at everything that's going on with our health and where there's any imbalance, so that we can start to rebalance those areas. And again, we can look in the different realms of our body, our biochemistry, our mental emotional space, our energy bodies too.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it's important to understand why you could go to the doctor many, many times, many years, and still get nothing as far as a diagnosis. Not that you're really wanting to, but I can say from personal experience, there was a time where I was hoping that I had something that
Right.
made sense for how I was feeling.
Right.
But all of my tests came back, quote unquote normal.
Right.
And I was anything but normal as far as how I was feeling. So I think it's important to note too that is another aspect of functional medicine, that, if you're kind of in that space, maybe it's time to seek someone else out who is more in that functional space to help
Right.
you, kind of get some closure and looking at those issues, and, just helping you start to resolve sooner than later. Because
Yeah. The other aspect,
time on that.
yeah, functional medicine and holistic medicine is that if you're working with a really good doctor who has that big picture sense, especially who specializes in kind of the things that you've been dealing with, they're able to look and examine, run tests on things that you may not have even started noticing or feeling
Right.
are off. So, with blood tests, for example, I work with so many people who are like, oh yeah, I ran, thyroid tests and they're normal. My doctor said they're normal.
Yes,
and then when we
always.
actually get into working together, it's like, well, okay, send me your past tests and let's take a look at them. And I analyze the history of those tests, and I see that, first of all, they didn't run a full thyroid panel, for example.
Yeah.
They didn't run all the markers to look at the big picture, the patterns of what's going on in your biochemistry. And then when they say things are quote unquote normal, they're just saying they're not pathologically out of range, right? Like if we look at if the number is too high or too low, they can only really say that they're quote unquote not normal when they're like severely out of range, because then they can match it to a conventional treatment option, such as a thyroid hormone replacement or a surgery or things like that. But when we look at it from a functional medicine standpoint, we want a much tighter range of what those lab numbers show, because we don't want it to just be not disease. We want it to be optimal, right? We want it to be healthy. So when you analyze the same exact test through a different lens of functional medicine, or through a philosophy of not just getting by or being dead or alive, then you want to look for optimal health. And that's where functional medicine is really wonderful, even with the work that you have done already with your doctors or any other previous labs you've done. If you work with a functional medicine practitioner who can analyze it from that perspective of optimizing our health and getting the most out of our life that we want. So it's really, interesting when I work with people, because a lot of times we'll rerun the blood work, but with more comprehensive biomarkers added. And we'll analyze the previous lab work and go, yeah, it wasn't abnormal, it wasn't out of range, but it's not ideal either. It's kind of right on the border, and you don't want to live right on the border, right?
No, there's definitely that fine line between normal and optimal, and they can be in that same parameter, but you can feel very, very different, depending on where you fall. So with that in mind, we're talking about, we just got off a little functional medicine tangent, which is awesome, to help clarify that for people. But let's talk about this view that you work with people, with sensitive people. Maybe define that a little bit for people. It's not just like sensitive as in that hurt my feelings, although that can be part of it. But what are we talking about here with sensitive people or empaths and things like that? And what do you see in your practice with that?
Yeah. So, I guess there's a lot of ways this could be explained, but I feel like most obviously for me is when I talk to someone and they say, oh yeah, I've been told I'm too sensitive my whole life. Like that right there to me is an indication that we're speaking to the right people here, right? And that can look like emotional sensitivity, for example, where sometimes people have that experience where they say, oh, I cry a lot, or, I react to things a lot more. But even to the point where maybe people have a hard time watching the news or violent or kind of horror movies or things like that, because they really experience it. That's another way that empaths experience things. They really absorb those experiences around them, the feelings and the emotions of other people, even if it's fictional, even if it's on a movie. So there's that emotional sensitivity. And then there's, from a physical standpoint, people who always kind of experience physical sensitivities, meaning they're sensory experiences are heightened. So as a kid, I remember I really hated certain fabrics, or like the tags on my clothes bothered me. And we're finding that those are sensory processing issues too, but some of that can come from potentially inflammation systemically in our body. It could potentially come from neurological processing imbalances. So there's a lot of ways of looking at that, and not just saying, oh, this child is finicky or whatnot. It's just, they can be physically sensitive, having sensory experiences, or people who maybe have a hard time with like different textures of stuff, even food. They're just like, oh, I really can't eat mushy things. Or these are like physical sensitivities that I see a lot with my clients. And then there's like biochemical sensitivity. So people who react really strongly to smells or perfumes or potpourri, like it actually makes them feel nauseous, or they're just like, oh my gosh, how can people wear cologne when they go out, like in the mall, or they're in an elevator, or like, the Febreze scents or those Glade plugins, those things really make them feel nauseous, right? Yeah. So that's biochemical sensitivity, or that can show up as like increasing food sensitivities, where people are like, oh, I really react badly when I eat this and this and this, and that's starting to increase. So it's this broad spectrum of just kind of being overwhelmed by stimulus in the world. And that can be anything from an emotional or an energetic experience to actually these physical things like scents in our environment, or car exhaust. That's another common one. People who get instantaneous headaches from car exhaust, or cigarette smoke. That's, a benzene ring sensitivity. So I see like that whole spectrum of stuff. And usually it all goes hand in hand. Somebody who's usually chemically sensitive is also emotionally sensitive. And when we talk about empaths, there's a lot of different ways of defining an empath. But I remember once being in a therapy session and kind of just describing my experience where, it was like, oh, I feel so much around me and this and that. And then my therapist just kind of goes, oh my gosh, you're an empath. And I just was like, oh, I never thought to define myself that way. Right. And so, a quick Google search, and I just read these things and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I do feel like when the energy shifts in the room, or when somebody's upset and they haven't said or something, or their breathing pattern changes, I just pick up on it and I carry it. And so that to me has been the most powerful understanding in my own healing process, is going, okay, wow, yeah, I am actually more sensitive than others around me, but that's not a flaw. That's not a fault. If I understand that I actually have these like, hyper ability to feel the world around me, and I learn to care for that and cherish that and have like healthy boundaries with it, it's actually a superpower. I have this ability to pick up on things before other people do. And rather than letting it control my life or overwhelm me, if I learn how to harness that skill and really take care of myself, then it can be a superpower. So I think most of the time people think that's like a flaw of theirs, right? Like, yeah, they get pushed aside, or I don't know, maybe they had like loved ones or people who didn't really get it or understand, and they would use that term, you're too sensitive, as an insult, right? But I think that I grew to really love and appreciate the fact that I'm too sensitive. Like, how can it be bad that I care too much? How can it be a bad thing that I feel and see, things in the world at this heightened experience? And so I just learned to create healthy boundaries around that, and then really cherish that as a strength of mine now, rather than an overwhelm.
Yeah, that's the key to it, because I think what happens is where people are empathic, super sensitive to everything around them, and until if they just believe those things, you're too sensitive, that kind of comment, then you feel bad about it, and you don't really recognize what it is and don't know to put boundaries up. Right. And I just think that ties into how people feel, or how sick they get, or how often they get sick, that type of thing. So you see that with a lot of your patients, correct?
Totally, definitely. I think every single person that works with me has that. Like, if I were to talk to them on the first call, they'd be like, yep, I definitely feel too sensitive, or I feel
Okay.
more sensitive than other people. And I think a common thing that I've seen linked with that too is the fact that we are so sensitive and we pick up on so much in our environment. I really relate that to the metaphor or the idiom, the canary in a coal mine, because when you look at that, it's, this beautiful songbird, right? And if people don't know what that means, the canary in a coal mine, it was at the turn of the century when all the coal mining was booming around the country. They didn't have the technology then to measure air quality in the coal mines. So what they realized was that these canary birds were really sensitive to changes in air quality, like toxins in the environment. And they would usually like die sooner than a larger animal might if it was exposed to slightly toxic air. So what they started doing, because they didn't have technology at the time, was putting these canary birds in a little bird cage and taking them down into the mines with them. And the coal miners would just be working. And if they noticed that the canary started acting weird, like it stopped singing, or, sadly, if the bird dropped dead, those coal miners knew, okay, the air quality has taken a turn for the worst and we need to get out of here, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really tragic, metaphor, but a lot of people have identified with that and they think, oh, I'm the canary in a coal mine, I always get sick. But if you think about that, it's not your fault. Like the canary is this beautiful songbird. And if it's in this environment where it's meant to thrive, it will thrive, right? But when you cage it up and put it in an overwhelming or a toxic environment, the canary is not going to do well. And it's also going to get sick. It's going to feel more sick and before everybody else. So it's really kind of like that omen. That's what the metaphor means. But I started a community called The Canary, which really recognizes that we are the canaries, and there's nothing wrong with us. We're just in a toxic environment, whether that's energetically, emotionally toxic, or like the pollutants in our world. And so when we just learn that about ourselves, we won't blame ourselves for not being like an alligator or like, a big rhinoceros or things like that, because we're the songbirds. And so being able to recognize that our bodies have that skill, we also want to treat it in ways that allow, our sensitive bodies to thrive. And so I found that, when we have so much stimulus in our environment, people who are sensitive, they tend to pick up on a lot more of that information, and then they carry it around like baggage, right? Literally too much weight. And so that overwhelm creates a sense of like too much all the time in our experience. Like we feel overwhelmed all the time, or there's too much to do, or we can't handle as much sound or light, or, eat the way other people can without having a reaction. And I found, that's kind of the way that I describe chronic trauma happening for people as well. Because, my definition of trauma might be a little bit different than other people's, but essentially when I talk to people about trauma and how it relates to their health and chronic illness or autoimmune conditions, it's really the fact that trauma is just an experience we had where we were overwhelmed and we didn't have the tools to adapt or cope with the situation. So it's not per se a good or bad thing. I think a lot of times people have this association with trauma always having to be this terrible bad thing that is just horrific or tragic. But traumas can also be more subtle. They can be more neutral. It's just if we get overwhelmed at any point and we don't have the tools to adapt or understand that experience, that ends up being traumatic for us because we get thrown for a loop, we feel overwhelmed, and then we store that in our body, in our experience, in our mind. So when you think about it that way, if we are those canaries in a coal mine, we're constantly being bombarded with information, or it doesn't even have to be toxins, we're just bombarded. Yes. We end up carrying so much more baggage with ourselves, that we're more likely to get fatigued or collapse under stress or those sort of things, and then develop chronic illnesses. So that's kind of the big picture of how I approach something that's been really stressful and, kind of, difficult for me and my patients to go through, and find this way of reframing it and shifting it, saying, look, we just need to figure out what your strengths are and learn at what points you experienced those overwhelming traumas and unravel them, and give you the tools to process those past traumas and the tools to deal with your present moment and things moving forward.
That's perfect, because our world, we are constantly bombarded,
Right.
whether it's, we like to compartmentalize good and bad stress, but like, just like, with the trauma. And the bottom line is that we're just constantly we're under attack, just because
Right.
of even our just day-to-day lives, our jobs, our families, our kids, or, whatever we have to do.
Yeah.
And so add that, many other things to that. And when chronic illness sets in, or, anxiety and depression and all those types of things, it just can be a storm.
Right.
You
Totally.
need to figure out a way to get out of it. So how do you help people get out of it? I know you said you start identifying where those traumas live and how, when they happened and that kind of thing. What are some tools or modalities you use to do that?
Yeah, definitely. So I use a really broad range of stuff because like I mentioned to you in my own healing journey, all of it helped me at some
Mm-hmm.
point or another. It just has to be matched to the person
Right.
at one point. So the best way I like to describe my approach to working with people or unraveling someone else's issue is when you think about the yin yang symbol that is in Chinese medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and how there's one half of it that's black and one half that's white, and then there's a little bit of the white and the black in each other half.
Yeah.
And when we think about that, that is the symbol of balance, right? With the polar forces in our life. So when I approach any person or any client, we do an assessment and we look to see where their yang symptoms are and where their yin symptoms are. And then we match it to the treatments or the modalities. So the things that I would describe as a yang approaches, the more traditionally quote unquote masculine, but that just means
Mm-hmm.
it's more action oriented, it's more investigative, it's more logical data oriented.
Okay.
That's doing things like we already talked about, like lab testing, functional medicine, diet, lifestyle, supplement protocols, detox maybe, or like exercise plans, things like that. Everything that falls under that category of investigating, coming up with some data, some information, putting patterns together, and then creating an action plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the yang approach, which is so essential and changed my life in so many ways.
Right.
But I also actually really love focusing on the yin side of things. So that's the traditionally feminine energy. And it's more about trusting your intuition, learning to develop your intuition, where especially people with chronic illness at some point have been taught to mistrust their own intuition, their own inner voice, like let it go or override it. So tapping back into that, learning to harness your sensitivity as a superpower and surrendering. So it's way more like less about making a plan and following through with an action, but more about surrendering and receiving care. So that can show up with when we do things where we're like really tapping into our thoughts and our emotions. Sometimes with like the talk approach, but a lot of times by the subconscious, like doing muscle testing on the body, even doing self muscle testing, or doing things that have to do with our mindset, where we think about like our belief systems and how we experience the world. And then all this stuff that I kind of talked about, trauma healing, that's a major core of when I work with chronically ill people. We really look at trauma on a spectrum, not just trauma like a car accident or abuse or, major things like experiencing like a war-torn experience, but also more minor traumas like repetitive insults or like recurring relationships that just seem to kind of grate at us.
Right.
Or even just feeling like that sensitive child who was exposed to a lot of sound and light and social environments that were, essentially subjectively traumatic to us. So we use modalities around energy medicine or somatic body work, things like that, where we really tap into shifting mindset or receiving care. And so a lot of this is wonderful when it's done in person. When I do like healing intensives or retreats with people. So we do hands-on therapies, we do energy release from the body, chiropractic adjustments, Reiki style energy work, laser therapy, those all fall for me under that yin medicine, because it's somebody, shows up and they sort of surrender to like their vulnerability and then they receive. It's that receptive yin energy. So a lot of that can be done with a skilled bodywork practitioner or somatic therapy, but it also can be done on your own at home. I do a lot of like chakra work on myself, or, learn how to feel those areas in my own somatic experience and release them. So I teach people how to do that too. It's, that's the part I love focusing on. Cause, I know you were talking at the beginning too about functional medicine and how powerful that is. And I totally agree. I think that's an amazing thing. But I think being such, that sensitive doctor, that approach that I love digging into people's emotional experience and helping them understand their story and unravel the yin side of things.
Right. So it's the difference between the more action-oriented type healing, which is the yang, and then the yin is the supportive healing. All the work around, and that can look very, very different for everybody.
Yeah.
It sounds like. And then I love how you take sort of a tailored approach. You have a big bag of tools, a big bag of tricks to help people, but you can match it up with the person's needs according to what's going on.
Yeah,
how they're feeling.
Definitely.
So what is there anything else you want to touch on with that? And then I just want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, no, I think it's just, everybody's experience is different. We always talk about bioindividuality. And this is just not like, it's not just our genetics or our body work. It's also the life experiences we had.
Right.
And I think that's why the healing journey was so amazing to me. And I really loved where I got into, because like I told you, it was my chiropractor who really first identified all this imbalance going on with me. And she started immediately doing body work, but she also started teaching me about functional medicine and whole foods and, even energy, like chakra centers in my body. So that was really powerful. I was really lucky to find, a chiropractor who did such a holistic approach, because there's so many techniques even within the chiropractic field. But my intro to this was more somatic oriented. I find that most people's intro is more yang like oriented. It's more like they ran blood work or they tried changing their diet. So I did the body work stuff first. I did the energy medicine body work first, felt amazingly better, and then started investigating the lab work and the diet changes. And that really worked for me because I'm more of a flowy type person. I don't do so well with like regimens and, like rules and things like that. So I think had I approached it initially very yang energetics, like the medicine around that, I would have probably felt like I failed, because it would have been hard for me to just make diet changes when I was at my rock bottom, or, like do things where I had to put more will and energy into it. So I think that is a really interesting way for people to think about it for themselves. Like if they're ready to kind of put energy into investigating stuff, then that would be great for them to seek out functional medicine and kind of get answers and figure out like if they do well with discipline, like protocols and like plans for them, because that's where a great functional medicine practitioner can give them supplement plans or prioritize which tests to run. And then for another group of people, well, they already feel like that might be way too much for them, like they've already exhausted like their willpower to do things, they can't even move or get out of bed. I really encourage them to look into some energy healing or body work to at least give them a little bit of vitality, a sense of revitalization or rejuvenation. So then they can, next step would be to then start doing that investigative yang functional medicine stuff. So if people feel like overwhelmed to begin with, try some more gentle receptive therapies, like working with craniosacral therapist or Reiki or that. And then when you start feeling that revitalized sense, mix that with functional medicine.
Yeah, I like how you say that, because my longer term program, it's very, functional medical nutrition oriented, and really there's a method to the madness kind of process that we go through, but also within the modalities, I should say the modalities, the modules. I'm going through different ways of self-care and, kind of this intuition work, this emotional eating patterns that people end up with. And we look at that type of thing. I'm not trained in anything specific, or I'm not a therapist, all that kind of thing, but we go through so people can have that awareness. And sometimes throughout our one-on-ones throughout the program, I'll say, okay, stop with whatever way of eating you should be doing right now based on your symptoms, and you need to focus on A, B, and C of self-care or whatever it is. So it's good for people to be able to give themselves a break, and to go into more, like you said, of that receptive and not so action oriented, because it's exhausting. When you are exhausted and at your rock bottom in the first place, to, as you were pointing out, to start this go of doing, it's exhausting when you're already exhausted. So I'm glad you said that and clarified that for people. that you can.
Yeah, they definitely, and it's really important to make sure you fill your cup. So I love that you talk about that, like taking a break and focusing on self-care and things like that. Cause I think that is where we get long-term results. We get those
Right.
sustainable lifestyle practices. And so, yeah, I really, I really value that because I pieced it together myself going through my own healing journey. And it was with like so many different types of therapists. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think what like really great holistic doctors can do is kind of point you in the right direction. Cause usually most people don't do it all, right? Like
Right.
we're able to kind of see the bigger picture of someone's experience and say, right now might be a good time for you. Yeah. To pause the dieting or to go see, a counselor or to go work
Mm-hmm.
with an energy therapist or go get some Reiki sessions or acupuncture. So things like that, being able to coordinate someone's big picture
Mm-hmm.
experience. I think that's been where I see just a phenomenal success with my clients of turning like major things around, whether it was emotional stress and traumas or leaving a toxic relationship or just having unrelenting allergies and food sensitivities where they're eating like 4 foods in their whole, routine.
Mm-hmm.
Just through this process, usually within 3 to 6 months, we see these massive shifts because when I can look at all the pieces for them and coordinate that, then we can find the things that move the needle the most, rather than pushing further in a direction where the cup's already empty.
Right. It's pretty amazing when you start digging into it and when people kind of look, and I know when I was at my worst, to think of it's going to take 3 or 6 months to feel better, that seemed like impossible to wait for because of how
Right.
horrible I was feeling. But then going through, there was just little tiny wins that
Right.
in within those first 3 months or 6 months or whatever that helped me keep going. And then when you look back, it's like, I don't know, there's been a couple times where I've gone close to my rock bottom just with this up and down
Right.
stuff with thyroid cancer. That's just, I won't go into all that, but where I've almost been back to ground zero, but
Right.
not quite. It's never been that bad. And then I knew exactly what to get out of it. So it is a process. And if you
Right.
truly want to heal, it's not a quick fix. It's not an overnight thing. It's not something you just, pop a pill or do some
Right.
stretching or do some body work and you're good to go. It's
Right.
a process. So people need to kind of understand that too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I always let them know at the beginning is I am here to teach them, to empower them to learn how to connect to their body, connect to the messages that their body is giving them and learn the toolbox that has all those tools where, like you're saying, when you have those ups and downs or you feel like you're kind of regressing a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, I've been here before. I know what helps get past this
Right.
little slump that I'm having. And yeah, I love, I love focusing on within the autoimmune world. I've struggled through a lot of autoimmune conditions,
Mm-hmm.
Hashimoto's, celiac, a lot more. And they call that a flare up. Like when we
Yeah.
have, that, that experience where we're like, okay, things are going bad again. And so I really help people understand. I have a program too called Flare Care, where we really learn that exactly what you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, where you're like, okay, I know this works for me,
Right.
because there's an endless number of things that you can, Google or read on blogs or whatnot. But when you're
Mm-hmm.
working with somebody like as you coach people through your online program or one-on-one, or the way that I work with people as well through my programs and my one-on-one is like, we're teaching them. So it
Right.
is a longer process. This is not something you're showing up, getting a prescription or a couple treatments, and then you don't even know what happened, right? You're dependent on that practitioner. What we're doing with people is teaching them what's going on with their own health and their own body so that for the rest of their life, they're empowered. So for me, 3 to 6 months is like an amazingly short time frame to turn
Right.
around a lifetime of chronic illness or sensitivity, right?
Yeah, it is when you look back at how long you've been feeling the way you're feeling, there's that, like I said, that for me, that desperation was like, oh, I needed this to happen or change now.
Right.
Just, because you're so sick and tired of it. But yeah, it's really in the big scheme of things, it's nothing. It's a blip in time. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
well,
definitely.
I really love this conversation. I think it'll be very helpful and beneficial to so many people, and especially knowing that they can reach out to you at, what's your website?
It's Dr. Natasha F. So DrNatashaf.com. It's just my name, and that's my handle on Instagram as well and Facebook. So people can find me there. And if they want to send a message to me. But on my website, I have a description of a lot of these approaches that I take or the different modalities I use, and a link to my canary group, that group of sensitive people who are just navigating the world
Mm-hmm.
together. So, people can join the canary group, or send me a message or apply to work with me one-on-one, because I really love connecting with like-minded people. I think
Yes.
my rock bottom experience, I really thought that was the end. I was like,
Yeah.
this can't keep going this way. And there was days I did not want to wake up. So I know that
Mm-hmm.
I promised myself that if I got out of that, that I would do everything I could to share those tools with other people. And
Yeah.
so that's where I find myself today. I love connecting with people who are on that journey as well, and just need a friend to guide them to a place where they can feel like themselves again.
That's amazing. That's exactly why I do what I do as well. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so drnatashaf.com, and that's where you can get in there and look at all of the options she has. But that canary group sounds pretty amazing as well. So make sure to check her information out. And again, I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I love talking to you about all this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really great connecting, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Awesome. Let's do that.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.